Hello and welcome to the next class. I'm Rob Birdsell, your host, and is joined always by my co-host Tom Burnford. Tom, welcome.
Thank you. Great to see you, Rob. Glad to be here.
And we have our guest this week, very special guest, Jeanne Allen, who's been a longtime friend and colleague. Jeanne, I don't even want to know, trying to figure out how many years, but it's great to have you here. Jeanne is the founder and CEO of the Center for Education Reform. So welcome, Jeanne.
Thanks, Rob. Good to see you. Good to see you, Tom.
Great. Good to see you too, Jeannie. And Jeannie, tell us, a lot's going on with the YAS Prize at the Center for Education Reform. This is an exciting and very positive time in terms of that program. And then we'll talk about other stuff later. But tell us about the YAS Prize and where we're at.
Well, the YAS Prize is a new endeavor that actually CER is managing and leading, and it is
Okay.
intentionally the vast majority of our resources. The way I describe it is CER spent the first 29 years building supply, or the first 28 years building demand, I should say. And now we're going to spend the rest of the time that we're working on supply. Very different organization than it once was. Yas Prize is named for Janine Yas and her husband Jeff, who were very frustrated during COVID at the lack of rigor, the lack of education going on in so many places, and knew that there were outliers. They'd seen them, we'd heard about them, and wanted us to help them stand up a prize to reward one prestigious provider who did great stuff under COVID. It turned out the group of people who were doing amazing things across the country during COVID was so astounding that we ended up giving 20 awards.
Yeah.
And originally it was called the STOP Award for Sustainable, Transformational, Outstanding, Permissionless Education. Sustainable because you have to be able to thrive, and transformational because why aren't we doing things with all that we have available to us? Outstanding, permissionless, not so much have to explain.
And permissionless is a great word, though, isn't it? Maybe not with my kids, but it's a good word. I like that word.
Yeah, I mean, you should not have to ask permission to do things that are good for education, that are good for kids.
Right.
Became the YAS Prize. This year it tripled. We just finished giving away or selecting the 64 quarterfinalists and then the 32 semifinalists. They will compete for the 7 finalist slots and eventually the prestigious $1 million YAS Prize. Altogether, those 64, though, will receive together in excess of $11 million. And the idea is really simple, Tom and Rob. You've been doing this a really long time. We're on the hunt for great education innovators that are providing amazing opportunities for students in every sector. And we think that the more we can identify them, the more likely we are to change and alter the problem that we have writ large across the traditional education system.
That's wonderful, and that's substantial prizes as well, which will make a difference in those schools continuing to do creative and innovative, excellent work. That's great.
And it makes a difference in finding them. You know, a lot of philanthropies. So we are basically a high impact philanthropy is the way I describe the work.
Right.
I run the YAS Foundation for Education along with CER now. And what I'd argue is and say is that instead a lot of foundations look out there and they say, oh, well, we're going to wait for people to come to us. And then you have to sift through stuff, and it's not very fair to the people who are applying. All of us have probably applied for grants in our lifetime.
Right.
I spent a really long time, most of my professional career, probably doing more of that than program. And I have to say that my lens is really different because of that, because I didn't know what people are looking for. They told me on paper that's what it was. But if you invite people actually and you say, here it is, and you help them and you give them tools and you do webinars and you give them lots of access. We didn't do it as well in the first year. We're doing it really well now. You can kind of figure out, am I going to qualify? Is Boston Public Schools going to qualify? Probably not. Unless there's something transformational, outstanding, permissionless about what you're doing, probably not. Is there an educator in the Boston Public Schools that might?
Right.
A leader who is coloring outside the box? Who knows? So, that's been really fascinating.
Well, and Jeanne, I was looking through the group. Amazing. I mean, for our listeners, go to the YAS Prize website, and there's some great innovations. Two, I'd just like to give a shout out to Father Judge at Vendevet High School in Philadelphia. Great school, great leadership team. And then one of my favorites, Open Sky, Andrew Newman and the team there doing great work. So just a shout out to two that I've been to, but I really enjoyed, Jeanne, looking at them all. I mean, really interesting, KaiPod is another group I know doing some interesting work. And
yeah, and they're not all schools. They're ed tech providers. They're micro schools. I mean, Father Judge in Philadelphia, fascinating alumni. He came back and basically said, I want to make sure that students always have a career path, but that you don't preclude them from also going to college. Like, give them something high skill, work with business and industry, give them incredible tools, but you're still going to teach them the basics. You're not just sending them to shop class.
Right. No, yeah, it's great. Let's pivot for a moment. Jeanne, big week in education, the biennial release of the NAEP scores. Shocking, stunning, disturbing to say the least.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to begin, but tell me your thoughts on the NAEP scores.
Yeah, dramatic declines in reading and math for most populations. 3 to 5 points in some cases. And why are we surprised? We shouldn't be surprised. I mean, actually, the real story that should be out there that's not is it was awful. And it's nothing we didn't expect because of the pandemic, but it actually dates before the pandemic. Our kids have been roughly proficient around the 33 to 35 percentile. Like 1/3 of our kids can read, write, spell. By the way, civics, history, science is out there at grade level, at what is expected for you to be able to be successful at the next level. That declined, awful. It was like ratcheting up a little bit, particularly in states, I'd argue, that have innovation opportunity. But it wasn't dramatic. And then if you look at the subgroups and minority groups, it's even worse. I mean, it could be below 20 in some cases. So the big story is not only did the pandemic rip off much of progress being made around the country and put kids in a serious disadvantage, and fourth graders who can't read, I don't have to tell you as educators, have a really hard time catching up. Ninth graders, eighth graders last year, ninth graders this year, where do you go with that? Math, reading. But it actually, if you look at the trends, it's a wake-up call. We've not been killing it for a really long time.
Yeah. And for most of our listeners, that are Catholic educators, there is actually a little bit of a silver lining here that Catholic education, if it were a state, would be the number one state in the nation and actually showing gains.
Yeah, huge prize goes to Kathleen Porter McGee. She runs the partnership schools in New York City. We were all like in the back of the database looking like, where's the disaggregated Catholic and charter? And she posts this thing on Twitter that, had thousands of people like commenting on if Catholic education was a state, it'd be the best performing. And then you start looking at the numbers and it's dramatic. Not only are Catholic school students less or more Catholic students proficient and above, by as much as 8 to 10 percentage points in some states. But the number below basic, so people watching need to really understand this. So below basic means like you're barely hanging on to like fourth grade, right? You need help. You're probably a remedial education. You can get by. You can certainly have a conversation. You can play on your Game Boy or whatever the heck they use today. It's totally dating myself.
Game Boy.
I'm going to do BlackBerry next. But you're not. You can add probably and subtract, but you're not really ever going to be on top of it or frankly on a college or exciting career path. But Catholic schools have fewer kids that are below basic. I mean, extraordinary. So if your kids came home and they could not read at grade level, what would you do? Like, would you keep sending them to the same school if you didn't have to?
That's the key point right there. If you didn't have to, that's the challenge. Is so many, especially low-income families, don't have a choice.
Exactly. And that's why, again, the other big story that I think is going to be written over these next several weeks as more people parse through the data is let's look at where things are working better, where there were fewer drops, where there are more increases. Hispanic students in Florida, upward trajectory. Why did LA stay the same? Right?
That was fascinating.
All right. Yeah. So that's something we have to dig into. I could be really cynical and say because all the students doing really poorly in LA are in charter schools, but I haven't looked deeply at the charter school data. I could say that they did a better job with virtual education. I don't know that they did. So I think we really have to kind of dig into if there is a correlation
Yeah.
and where those kids are.
Yeah. And I mean, Jeannie, one of the things, I mean, when I look at the data, it begs the question, I mean, what do we do? What do we do? And clearly we need to understand and dig into the data and look at it regionally and by population and understand and pull out what's working. But I mean, you've been at this a while. What should we do to really move this forward and address this massive challenge?
Yeah, Tom, I know a lot of my friends that are hardcore researchers and have been academic. Not that I lack some of those credentials, or my detractors and our detractors would say this is simplistic, but it really is freedom and flexibility. At the very heart of it, one of the things that I can see in real time right now with those awardees we were talking about earlier with the Yas Prize is they had the freedom and flexibility to go, I'm trying to solve a problem with how you get kids into the trades. So uncommon construction is going to both, and they want to change communities, because if you change the trajectory of a community, you can change the trajectory of education. If you can meld adults and kids together. So I'm going to help my students learn to build houses. Then I'm going to incentivize them to graduate high school and have good credit scores. And we're going to give them, we're going to make sure they get 0 interest mortgage loans on the houses they built.
Right.
Who would do that? Who does
Yeah.
that? It's a private school.
Yeah.
All right. And it's a private school that's using Alabama tax credit dollars.
Right.
To do just that.
So they've got the freedom to access the funding and then the flexibility to meet the needs of a local community.
Meet the needs of students. Or look at a more traditional, non-traditional, charter kind of Catholic hybrid, BREA public schools. BREA, a charter school network that has this wraparound before and after school, so it's legal to provide moral and values-based teaching with a Catholic twist. Charter schools, right? They open up in the Bronx, the worst community. Suddenly parents are coming out of the woodwork. They're sending their kids there. We have seen this over and over again, whether it's private, whether it's Catholic, or whether it's a traditional public school, which just says, school board, you want me here? The superintendent of Chickasaw County basically said to his school board, don't bother me. I got a lot of stuff I want to get done.
Right.
And does it, right? It's creative non-compliance at its best. It's just that we don't have enough people willing to stand up and do that or think they can, because we're all rule followers, because we were all raised in sit there in a row in desks and don't talk out of turn. I'm sure all of us, maybe not you, Tom, but I bet Rob and I were probably constantly being told to shut up in class, right?
Oh, no, I was. Yep.
Or you are. I thought you might be, but I didn't want to insult you too. I've known him longer. But honestly, the fact that, and people, that's simplistic, isn't it reading? Yeah, it's reading, but reading instruction, someone said this to me on Twitter, but it's reading, you're being simplistic. Absolutely. Who does great reading instruction? If you can. Okay, how many people can throw out the book they have and say, this isn't working, or I'm going to change around and switch around the way my classroom is working, or I'm going to do something completely different, and I'm going to tell kids to go in another room and come back after they've mastered it.
Yeah.
So it's having that at the heart of it. And that's why this system that we have today is so bad. The traditional education system, it's not the people. It is 65 years since we have literally been mandating that people go to these enormous districts. They've been going for 100 and some odd years to schools, but those big districts really started forming and consolidating, well-intentioned, in response to desegregation, to make sure everyone had equitable access to schools. But we made it bigger, impersonal, cookie cutter, uniform, and contractual.
Yeah, and that's a massive obstacle. I mean, that's one of the things we want to talk about. What are the obstacles are increasing quality education, in the United States, and that's clearly one of them. I mean, and when you talk about freedom and flexibility, that requires letting people do their work at the most local level to meet the needs. Yeah.
But Tom, in the Catholic tradition, it's very decentralized.
Yes.
Every school is its own entity. I mean, we do have the diocese, but it's really the pastor of the parish who's running that school. We're going to take a quick break here to get a word from our sponsors.
Catholic Virtual is the trusted online education partner of Catholic schools worldwide. We develop customized online learning solutions to meet the needs of our partner schools and their students. Visit our website at www.catholicvirtual.com to learn more. Now back to the episode.
So Jeanne, let's talk about something Tom and I talk with almost all of our guests about. When we've been talking about this, the YAS Prize is certainly about this, but innovation in education. What is something you've seen or that you think is coming that you're really excited about, that you see as transformational, that certainly Catholic school leaders should hear about and know about as they're thinking about their school year this year and going into the future?
Well, first I'd say that I'm never going to presuppose, not being in the classroom in a school every day, that I know exactly what that is. I think innovation, a friend once said to me, could be a pencil. It could just it's how you use it. So I think that what I'd love to leave with particularly Catholic school folks is you have to stop being as structured as you've been. I was in a Catholic school in a city not too long ago that was half empty.
Mm-hmm.
And in that same community, there are charter schools that are oversubscribed. And I said, what about maybe inviting in charter schools to take your space, pay you their per pupil dollars, on a pro rata basis. You do what you do really well with those students, like reading and math, but you just told me you don't have language and great science people. And let them do that. Share a cafeteria, share an auditorium. Yeah, I get there's a culture issue. But why don't you just jump in, subsidize the fact that you've got really good stuff happening, introduce students to another way of doing things. And they couldn't even visualize how that could possibly advance their mission. Maybe it wouldn't. Maybe it's a crazy idea. But if you don't try, roll up your sleeves and do that, Catholic schools aren't going to solve both their undercapacity problem in some cases, even though it's been changing since COVID, their financial issues. They're certainly not going to become more sustainable. And they're not going to be able to show us all the great magic and secret sauce they're doing because they won't have created this partnership. Right. So I think there are, I think that's one area. I think certainly when we talk about 21st century education that's, technology driven, technology, again, it could be a pencil, the way you use a tool, just like an innovation, but what are you doing to make sure that the student sitting in class who's really, really advanced in some things, but maybe not others, has access to stay excited? What project are you giving the artsy girl who really can't sit there for all that time, but actually has this incredible acumen to do something differently, right? Could we send her down to another room to create a project that she could get credit for while somebody else is in the classroom doing something else? Why do we have to have those kinds of walls? Classrooms are good, but why can't we open up and actually have education happening outside of 40 or 50-minute blocks across different methods of instruction?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, Jeanne, we had a guest, Brent Madden, a few weeks ago from Arizona State, who was talking similarly about the box, the teacher in the box has got to be broken down because it's unsustainable. It's why we've had 500,000 teachers leave the past few years. And I think what you're talking about is also the students. It's not sustainable for many of the students. It isn't, the box isn't the right fit for them.
Right. It's not that compelling. And again, it's not changing exactly what you're teaching. It's changing how. And I do fault to some extent Catholic education and Catholic educators of educators, or even the way our leaders hire. I know you're running in place to keep up and they're doing God's work and good education work, as we've seen from the scores. But you have the freedom and flexibility. You can do even more. Yes. And so instead of going to the conference where all the same people are, go to the conference where people are talking about things like this.
Right. And I mean, Jeanne, I think, as you know, I've worked a long time in Catholic education, and in some sense, I feel like we were, on occasion, our own worst enemies by creating restrictions and barriers and walls, without asking the question, well, why do we need to do it that way that everybody else does it, right? Why do we need to? And that's something that's coming out through our conversation with you, is challenging the question, well, it's got to be done this way, right? Or we can't separate, we can't have kids doing different things at different times. And there may be very good reasons why we can't, but it's challenging that question at the local level, I think, is it's just hard because there's a natural tendency to systematize, to build big bureaucracies and all the rest of it. That's, yeah.
I think there's also something about, I want to say this right, and this has been my experience, but I've also heard other people say this in a lot of different places on a professional level. If you're an educator, whether you're wherever you were trained, you know what you're supposed to do. You're not a policy person, and you weren't hired to figure out what everybody else in other schools were doing, right? Like we're in this, like all of us are in this really weird job. I'm actually paid to figure out what other people are doing.
Right.
Teachers are not.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether it's my friend, the public school teacher who says, well, I don't know anything about that. I just know this is what I'm supposed to do. And can't quite get our arms around when I say, why don't you try this? Or the Catholic school principal who says to me, well, you don't know anything about education. We're in the classroom every day. And I'm like, well, no, that's not true. I really do. But like, I guess it doesn't look like I do because I'm not a trained teacher. So there's actually the craft and the curriculum, but there's understanding and being able to see that other things are happening, that sometimes we don't incentivize teachers when we hire them in Catholic schools to think about that.
Yeah.
How are other people doing in math? What's blended learning? Why are they doing it? Are there different ways to actually structure a classroom? I don't know. Where's that talked about?
It's one of the hopes of this podcast, Jeannie, is bringing interesting people. And, we hope that, and we know that there are teachers listening to this as they walk to school, and bringing people like you and Brent and Jeb Bush and others so they can begin thinking, wow, I hadn't thought about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It is one of our goals here.
It's great.
Yeah. So, Jeannie, one thing, I want to ask you to sort of look ahead and look forward, but as to what changes you see coming down the pike. And I know one arena that obviously is important for us is, the access that private schools do have to some services from state and government. So we've got access to some services. I always get frustrated because I feel like a lot is left on the table, or there's a huge amount of bureaucracy that makes it very difficult to access those. But what are your thoughts in terms of either that, or also just what you see coming down the pike that can really help transform education, and I think particularly private education, and hopefully that would enhance public education as well.
Absolutely. And I think it's a little bit of the same answer I'd also give to teachers listening and educators and others in Catholic education. And by the way, I've sent all my kids there. I want to make sure everybody understands I love Catholic schools. I just want to be better, and I want to make sure they thrive.
Absolutely.
And I didn't have that benefit myself. So I think we have to constantly be asking the question, who's doing it in different ways that I could learn from? Who's doing it better? What am I doing better that I could share?
Yeah.
And then that kind of connects to the policy piece, which is like, why aren't we going after these dollars? So everyone has to be kind of their own entrepreneur. I actually think that the key to saving the teaching profession as well is making every teacher an entrepreneur. Like, here's your classroom, here's your world. We want you to figure out how you develop the best tools and strategies. And you tell us if there's money at the state level, the federal level, are there private dollars? Like, you go out and draw those, and you're going to be rewarded and given more skill, responsibility, and probably payment because you found that and brought it into your classroom. If you say to me, I need $2,000 and I'm your principal because I want to go to the ASU GSV conference, or I want to go to, like, I don't know, London EdTech X. And this is the specific reason, because these are the people on the agenda I want to learn from. And I'm going to make sure that we bring that money back in spades. then
Right.
suddenly I'm setting up my school for success, and sort of at a retail level, I'm increasing its value, and I'm probably increasing and attracting more dollars as a result. Because now, as the leader of the school or the superintendent of a system, I'm marketing the fact that I'm doing more unique things and better things than other systems.
Right.
And that's somewhat on a private philanthropy, but it's also public. And then that dovetails to something else, which I know we've all talked about personally in our relationships over time, which is don't sit on the sidelines. Like, there are parents right now who could be writing to gubernatorial candidates
Yep.
or to state legislators and saying, I'm watching, because in a couple of weeks when I vote, if you're not supporting my right to choose the school for my child, I'm not going to vote for you.
Right.
And that message from the pulpit, that message from the leader on a regular basis has to get out there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. Well, Jeanne, we are so appreciative of you joining us. As always, an interesting conversation. We will end with one final question, which we ask all of our guests, and it's very much along the theme of our conversation today. But who is your greatest teacher and why?
Oh my gosh.
Gotcha.
Okay, I'll tell you who my greatest teacher was and why. So actually, it wasn't K-12. Although, well, there were. This is so hard. There are like a lot of them. One probably for everyone. All right, I'm going to throw you one, but it's not the only one that was the greatest teacher. Okay.
Right.
I would say it was Mrs. Feldman, American Government, high school.
Uh-huh.
I never knew her politics. She got me hooked on American government and getting involved, and taught me more than I'd ever learned or knew about. And it's what actually compelled me in part to do what I was doing. And years later, I found out that our politics are completely different. But the fact that she never, ever gave an opinion about her philosophy is also just so laudable. And I've had people like that since.
That's wonderful.
That's awesome. Well, Jeanne, thank you for joining us on the next class, and we appreciate your time and insights. Great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it.
Thank you.